This is where it was at. It's especially when a night like Thelonious would come up and we would have the piano there for the play. The piano was tuned and everything was top notch, where the music would come out and be like it was supposed to be. And the man was very artistic and very particular about everything that he liked and playing the music and whatnot, and the people that came there to listen to it.
You talking about Monk?
I'm talking about Monk now.
Tell me when you first met Monk.
I met Monk in the early part of 41. 118th Street between 7th and St. Nicholas Avenue, on your left-hand side, Minton's Playhouse.
His melodies were beautiful. His chords were unusual. His colors, his rhythmic sense, you know, and the spiritual feeling in the music. You know, when you heard his music, it just carried you away.
The most difficult thing about Monk in the studio was a combination of his perfectionism and his really basic, I think, inability to understand what the hell was supposed to be so difficult about his music. You know, the attitude that he understood it, why couldn't you?
A lot of things that we do in common one to another. And we all do some of the usual things, you know. We use some of the usual phrases. Monk wasn't like that, you know. So Monk was like a real free spirit who said, I'm gonna play this way. This is what I want. And he played stuff that nobody else ever played. He was a rebellious spirit, and probably one of the few people who really stuck to their gun and got what he wanted out of what he wanted to do. You know, there's very few people who make it doing what they want to do. Monk went through a period of not making it, but he still was Monk. When he made it, he still was Monk.
He epitomizes what a jazz musician is supposed to be. He has a style which is instantly identifiable, whether it's in composition, whether it's in his playing, or whether it's someone playing along the lines of Thelonious Monk. It's a very personal approach to jazz.
Everyone treated Thelonious special. I knew there was something special about this guy because he didn't quite act like all my uncles or his friends, or you know, and everybody felt very happy. He elicited a real good feeling from everybody in the family all the time. You know, he was big on, like, anytime anybody in the family had a birthday, Thelonious was there to play Happy Birthday, which is an extraordinary event. To hear him play Happy Birthday, believe me, was not the traditional voicings. But you know, for a long time, I didn't really know what it was per se. You know, I would listen to him play the piano, and I knew that he didn't play like everybody. In fact, Now, in retrospect, as I get older, I would have to say there was certainly a point when I was very young where I was rather distressed that it didn't seem like Dad was doing what everybody else who was a world-famous entertainer was doing. You know, it was like he was into his own thing.
It was a message. He had a way of saying to the piano and giving you a message. You know, every note was clear, precise, at the same time a tremendous sense of swing. And in addition to all of that, he showed me that all the values of our music are modern, like stride piano, for example.
Monk was a stride pianist all of his life, and he would write even a very complicated piece of music, and he would play somewhere along the line stride piano because that was the way he heard things and the way he organized things.
Harlem stride piano was this incredible period around the 20s and 30s, you know, and 40s also, of the great, great pianists such as James P. Johnson, Lucky Roberts, Willie the Lion Smith, and many others. And they would play a lot of rent parties, you know, and the piano became like a total orchestra, and they would play for dancing. And James P. Johnson, ironically, he lived in San Juan Hill in the same area as Monk, you know. And James P. was one of our really master pianists. And they all went into stride, and stride was just a wonderful way for pianists to swing. I like stride.
I think it's easier to understand Thelonious if you realize that in many ways he was himself a tremendously traditional artist. He had a great awareness of the past in jazz. Well, you know, the area that he grew up in the West 60s in New York was an area that James P. Johnson was living in at that time, and apparently James P. was a childhood hero of his. I mean, I recall a recording session when I did the first solo album I did with Monk. We were standing in the control room listening to the playback of an improvised blues that he had done, and he turned around and said to me, "Gee, I sound just like James P. Johnson."
And for me, Thelonious was wonderful because he put the traditional and modern and put it together. So there was no separation, you know. And you wrote a beautiful blues called Functional. I'm going to play this for you and use a little bit of stride.
We first moved there was 1922, summer, right? So there were houses on both sides of 63rd Street. In fact, all the way up, like where they have Lincoln Center now, there were houses on both sides of the street all the way up to Central Park West. And most people were from the West Indies, and we were about the only Americans when we first moved over here. And since our name was Monk, they thought we were West Indian too. And then they found out that we weren't, you know.
And his mother was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was very, very close to a number of the ladies in the community, and Thelonious was very, very close to his mother. And although she came from Carolina, I think a lot of her influences in later life, the influences that affected Thelonious, because he came here when he was 3, came from those friends that his mother had, who were from, whose origins were in the various islands in the Caribbean.
Most of the West Indians you find, their children have to play something or do something. So most of them either play the piano or the violin. So in that atmosphere, my mother said I had to take piano, and Thelonious, he didn't want to play the violin, so he had to play the trumpet. So I took piano lessons, he took trumpet lessons. But they found out he used to have bronchial trouble, you know, cold in the chest so much. And the music teacher told my mother that he shouldn't play the trumpet because it was affecting, you know, his blowing. And he got interested in the piano. So my brother would start playing, and he found out he could pick up any tune that came along, you know, without the music. So my mother said that if he was going to play, he should learn how to play the right way. So the teacher who was teaching me, which I didn't like piano lessons, he started teaching my brother in my place, so he took lessons there.
There was a strong tradition of education. There was a strong tradition of religion involved in those things. There was a strong structure for respect and authority for elders and those kind of things, and those values were very, very important to Thelonious, and I think it had an overall influence on the way he went about his job in his music, which was very workmanlike fashion. To Apollo on Wednesdays to amateur night, and he and his 2 friends, a drummer and a trumpet player. But the 3 of them anyway, they would go up and they won every time they went up. So they barred them from coming up there because they were winning each time. They were too good to play, in other words, that's the way people considered it. Then he played other places. They just had gigs where they played different places. And then some preacher woman he went away with, she needed some musicians to go with her, you know, to accompany her when she was doing her healing and preaching.
And she came and asked my mother and the other kids' mother if they could go, because they were underage, so they had to sign for them. And they went away. So she needed these musicians, you know, they bring the people in, they play good music, and people follow music. And so they upped her business, and they were really helped too, because by going away and listening to different music and meeting different people, they became better musicians. And then from there, you know, he got to know people, and then he was going up to Minton's. They used to go in there and sit in and play and listen, until they finally had him. He was the piano player up there.
When you came in, the bar was here. It was a fairly big bar, but you could hear the music, which was back here. And it was set up so that you had tables all over the place. So you could eat, you could get sandwiches and stuff as well as drinks. And then as you came back this way, there was a kind of a dance floor, which I guess, if memory serves correctly, must have been about in here somewhere, because the tables were pretty much on the walls, and the bandstand, as I remember, was maybe about that high, maybe, because you had to go up steps to get on the bandstand. And this was the hippest crowd in New York. I mean, these people really listened to music. You had pimps and hustlers and people in the business, but you also had a lot of just sheer jazz fans. And I mean, these are people that knew that the music that they heard here was more often than not on the cutting edge.
This was the place where Monk, you know, got together, and he was playing a lot with Charlie Christian, and this is where they created this music, bebop. How it happened, we never know. It's kind of something that is like a miracle. You have Dizzy and Charlie Parker and Miles, they all get together and create this music called bebop. But Monk, he seemed to have been that central figure.
Chronologically, he existed at the beginning of the modern jazz movement. He was involved with all of the key players in the bebop game, but if you compare him, well, either with the most obvious comparison with Bud Powell, or if you compare him with some of the other young bebop players of the time, maybe somebody like Al Haig or Dodo Marmarosa, Monk was not really on the same wavelength as those people, or putting it another way, they weren't on the same wavelength that he was on.
I go to Thelonious' house, and Bud would come by a lot of times and hang out. But Bud had this awesome technique on the piano. I mean, he just created that whole bebop concept, you know, of piano, which everybody was attempting to play like Bud Powell, you know. Those tremendous runs, had that tremendous feeling, those huge chords that he would play, the tremendous tempos that he could handle. Thelonious was just like the opposite of that. Thelonious, he could take like one note, you know, and give you a message. He just could take one note. You take an octave and just take an octave. Like Thelonious is a good example of that, you know. And he could do that. Though he was
one of the main contributors to the music. He came to the music in the same way that Dizzy, Bird, Kenny Clark, each one was tremendously individualistic. Monk brought these harmonic and kind of rhythmic displacement where you would expect to hear rhythm going one way, he kind of moved it around a little bit. And you hear that in Charlie Parker. You hear that in where Charlie Parker goes over the bar line. You hear that in Dizzy Gillespie with some of his long lines. They loved Monk for that reason. I mean, he stimulated their thinking.
So with Monk, they said bebop. I think Time magazine said bebop and beyond. That's how it describes Monk's music, you know. So bebop was the term that was given this music. Although everybody played a little bit different. You know, Monk played a certain way, Bud Powell played a certain way, Herbie Nichols played a certain way, Miles Davis played a certain way, Fats Navarro played a certain way. But it was called bebop, but in a way, everybody had their own individual expression. I was just enamored with the excitement of being on 52nd Street, you know, with the 20 clubs and history of jazz right there, all in that one block, and all these fabulous musicians with, you know, Art Tatum. I'm working opposite Art Tatum. I'm working with Ben Webster, one of my all-time idols. Right next door is Coleman Hawkins with Don Byers playing, with Thelonious Monk playing on piano. And so, you know, it's nice to see a familiar face. It's like, hey, man, it's good to see what you've been into. And he said, well, I haven't been doing too much, but, you know, I've been doing a few things with Hawkins. And so I think they had like 2 or 3 weeks there at the club or something. I first heard Monk with Coleman Hawkins on 52nd Street, the club, I think called the Downbeat Club, you know. And I walked in because Hawk was my idol, you know. So wherever he'd play, I'd always be there. And I always catch a musician I never heard before. Well, my first reaction to Monk, because that night he didn't play much piano, you know. And I couldn't understand what Coleman Hawkins was doing with this piano play, because he was just hitting a couple of notes and just stopped and wouldn't play. But something drew me back. I went back again and discovered I was listening to a true genius.
He wasn't like every other piano players. I mean, he didn't do showbiz. He didn't throw his hands up he just played the piano and he did what he did. And if you didn't listen, then you might miss the point of everything, and most of them did. And Coleman Hawkins caught a lot of hell for hiring Monk.
Resistance that he got creatively and artistically came from the media and from the critique side, which has nothing to do with the music. I think he always felt a little bit maligned that he was considered outside of the mainstream, because I mean, if there was ever a mainstream guy, Thelonious was mainstream. All you have to do is listen to the compositions that he chose to perform, even early in his career. He was picking compositions by Berlin and by Cole Porter and Duke Ellington and those people, you know, and if you listen to his playing stylistically, Art Tatum, Willie the Lion Smith, Duke Ellington, all those people prop up so prominently, and that's why those guys knew exactly who he was and exactly what he was doing.